Hey, this is Jake Wood, host of the Viva Albertos podcast, as well as a writer for the site. I am so excited to join this community and bring you all top-notch content, as well as being a growing voice in the community.
Hi, I'm Heather Simon. I am the site manager at Viva Albertos. I am very excited about the upcoming season with you all, because something that I love about being with Viva Albertos is the amazing people and all the lifelong friends I have made.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Jones. I write under the pseudonym Skyrick ESQ for Viva Albertos. And my forte with the site is the roster rules. There's almost always a rules reason why moves are made, and I enjoy interacting with the community to help people understand why certain moves are made.
Hi, this is Gabe. I'm a writer for Viva Albertos. So I just love presenting my opinions and seeing the feedback from the community, who basically have taught me how to become a more knowledgeable baseball fan, to see what people think of what I have to say, and love to hear what other people say in the comments especially.
Hey, my name is Adam Akbani. I've been writing at Viva Albertos for going on almost 2-3 years now, and my favorite part is the whole community, being able to talk baseball with lots of fans, especially in St. Louis. It's always a great time.
Welcome into another episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. Tonight with me, we have site writer Adam Akbani. Adam, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great, Jake. Just kind of wish that everybody else would have been here, kind of missed the rest of the writers, but hey, we'll get this knocked out anyway.
Absolutely, man. We had some scheduling conflicts, unfortunately, tonight, and as far as Dan goes, we will reschedule him for the beginning of January. So we're still looking forward to talking to him, but something came up, and unfortunately, wasn't able to make it. So we'll make the best of it, and we'll because we care so much about our wonderful listeners, we decided we're going to put something out for you guys to listen to anyway. We're going to start tonight. Recently, a couple days ago, we found out that Paul Goldschmidt accepted a deal to go to the New York Yankees for 1 year and $12.5 million. What are your thoughts, Adam, on Goldie signing with the Yankees?
Yeah, so a couple things. With Goldschmidt, it really was a down year just regarding his on-field value, right? And you saw his performance take a massive dip over the past couple of seasons from his MVP season back in 2022. But if you look at the peripherals, he was still pretty good from a batted ball perspective. I think his hard hit percentage was well into the 40s. Just his contact ability kind of went down, and it was still, a decent amount this year. I think I can double check, but I think he's absolutely a candidate to bounce back. And in a field like Yankee Stadium, it's not necessarily going to be hitting towards right field like Cody Bellinger would be, so the shorter seats. But left field is no slouch either for home runs, and I could absolutely see his production bouncing back. So his zone contact rate was about the same. His career average is 81%, a shade over that. He was at 79.8% this past season. So, he's been hovering around his average contact ability, and his hard hit percentage was about the same as it normally is. He was at 48% this year over his career average at 46%. So I could absolutely see him bouncing back, maybe not to an MVP caliber player, but there's still a 2-3 WAR player in Paul Goldschmidt. He could surprise us with having more value on the field next year. So him going to New York for about $12 million could prove to be a very, very much a value pick for the Yankees. And it's unfortunate, but maybe just not the best fit in St. Louis anymore.
Yeah, I found it was an interesting landing spot for him. The idea that New York was probably exposed in the World Series for their lack of fundamentals, their lack of defense. Juan Soto and Aaron Judge basically carried that team to the World Series, and that just shows you, the value of two of the five best hitters in baseball, maybe two of the top three best hitters in baseball, some might say. And so when you look at what the Yankees specifically have done, bringing in Goldschmidt, bringing in Bellinger, signing Max Fried, trading for Devin Williams, trading for Fernando Cruz of the Reds. They're certainly making a lot of interesting moves that I think are addressing a lot of key needs for them. And I really think that, looking at Paul Goldschmidt specifically and thinking back to 2018, whenever he first came over to the Cardinals, and then like how he was able to kind of transform the infield defense as a whole, just having, him as a cornerstone there at first base, locking it down. He made everyone better. I would expect that he makes Chisholm and Volpe and whoever else ends up on that infield that much better just by his presence at first base.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I think he's, like I said, he's someone who's still got some gas left in the tank, even though he's heading into his age 37 season. So, I think there's a lot of good baseball in Paul Goldschmidt, especially him being in a hitter-friendly ballpark, especially him playing in other hitter-friendly ballparks in the NL East. The monster out in Fenway, although it's kind of tall, it's not the furthest out there in left field, the dimensions there, but I'm rooting for him. I think he's gonna have a good twilight to the end of his career, and hopefully that's gonna be enough to push him in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I think that he's pretty much there. When you look at Jay Jaffe, he has his Jaws rankings. I believe Goldschmidt's in the top 20 in terms of like Jaws score, and so most of those first basemen in that range are Hall of Famers, and so I believe he's very well on track to be there. I think the MVP in 2022 probably, if not completely, but mostly solidified him as a future Hall of Famer. I think it did a decent enough chunk to kind of get him there. Oh, look at that. Hang on a second, folks. Just like Austin 316 crashing through the glass, it's writer Dan Szymborski. Dan, how are we doing tonight?
Pretty good. I was about to hum the Steve Austin theme, but I think I am humming the wrong one.
That was that was incredible. Well, yeah, I can't hum it. I'm not nearly that skilled, but that was awesome. I'm definitely keeping that surprise. That was so cool. We thought we were having some scheduling conflicts, but Dan Szymborski pulls a Houdini on us and shows up anyway. And Dan, we were just discussing our thoughts on Paul Goldschmidt and his heading to New York. If you want to give your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, from the Yankees' point of view, I guess it's meh. The Yankees are weird. They aren't really run like a big mega market team anymore. I mean, they just did a salary dump to the Reds of all teams, which is an odd choice. I mean, I love Goldschmidt, but he is on the back end of his career. But they kind of, I guess, were a little bit cowardly with the whole Christian Walker thing. I mean, 360 in a draft pick, and they were that worried. I don't know. I'm not a Yankees fan, so I'm not exactly sad about that, but it just confuses me.
Right, and what I was discussing from my end was the fact that Goldschmidt and still has the elite intangibles and the really strong glove work over at first base. And when you think back to 2018, and the Cardinals weren't exactly the greatest defensive valued team, but whenever you plopped Goldschmidt over at first base, it seemed to make everyone else better. And as we saw in the World Series, that it tended to. The Yankees were a little bit exposed, if you will, for their defense and their fundamental play. And Goldie, I think, is a really good way to help solve some of those issues.
Yeah, in fairness, Zips, at least, does not like Ben Rice's defense at first base. When he was playing first in the minors, he regularly charted out as like one of the worst in the minors. I'm not exactly sure why. But, the computer sometimes says what the computer says, and I can't really say, well, this is the Dan Szymborski edit.
Yeah, no, Dan. Well, I mean, the questions that I had for Dan were, I mean, maybe not so much Cardinals related. They were just more model related.
No, go for it. Yeah, this is why we have Dan here. Yeah,
Dan, I'm a huge fan. I've probably go on Fangraphs a couple times a day, and I've been doing that for the better part of probably half my life at this point. You guys have a lot of really good content on there, and you guys do really good work. So I really appreciate you being able to come on today. I know like for pitching war was a question that I wanted to ask you. So I know Baseball Reference and you guys do it a little bit differently in the sense that Baseball Reference's model is trained around runs allowed per nine, whereas you guys do FIP. So my question is, like there's like a big debate over which one is better. I prefer to average the two just simply because it gives you a better idea of, maybe like instead of not being so biased towards one. Because the model is trained on FIP, I also know that Piper Slowinski back in the day released a model with Sierra, which does include the like the more which to be more specific, what you said here, where they say it adds the complexity to more accurately predict what makes a pitcher successful. Is there a reason why the model kind of just goes straight by FIP and maybe not Sierra?
Well, that's more like a Fangraphs war question. When I do the Zips projection, Zips uses its own war model, which I call Z War for Zips War, is as you might have guessed from the Z and everything Z related. Generally speaking, the way Zips War works is it does give credit to a hitter or a pitcher based on their historical performance relative to team, as you would expect in their FIP. So Marco Gonzalez, when he's with the Mariners, used to get a few extra runs in the Zips War than he'd get in the Fangraphs War based purely on his FIP. So Zips tends to be somewhere in the middle. When it actually goes up on the site in April, or I guess actually before that, it's actually done to the Fangraphs War. But right now it goes to the Zips War. And I think you run into two problems when you're comparing Fangraphs War and Baseball Reference War, is they're both trying to be simple, but the whole concept of changing a team stat, which is runs allowed, into an individual pitcher stat, it basically requires some kind of guesswork. In Fangraphs War, the risk is under describing a player, which is not attributing performance that existed to a player, which is probably a few runs. And in Baseball Reference War, the risk is over describing, because it simply assumes that the defensive abilities of the team are evenly distributed among the pitchers. It's not done on a per ball basis where it actually looks at the individual pictures and sees who the defense performed better for. So it might be attributing performance that didn't actually happen. That's the risk you have in the two systems. I tend to look at both when I make, evaluative things. If there's a wide difference, I usually take that into consideration, look at the circumstances behind it. So it's a thorny question, because the more complex you make war, like if Fangraph switched to like a Zips War model, you would run into an issue where it also becomes harder to interpret for people. You can understand FIP War because it's based on FIP, and Baseball Reference War in that it's based on runs allowed with a team adjustment for defense. But once you start talking about a separate model inside, which also estimates how much the pitcher's contribution above and beyond their ERA or runs allowed is, that it becomes kind of thorny. It's philosophically a kind of a difficult issue.
Okay, yeah. So I guess what I'm gathering is the reason why not Sierra and why FIP is because it would probably get too complex with adding, like potentially over accounting for how much a pitcher could be attributing to the overall value. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think
Okay.
it's interpretability is an underrated thing, I think, when people are talking about any kinds of analytics. Something that's slightly more accurate, that's a lot harder to understand, doesn't necessarily bring a lot of value towards the decision making process. Uh, we already know that war is going to have kind of a fudge factor, and that it's going to be off by a few. You have a 4.0 war guy and a 3.8 war guy. There's like it's like, okay, maybe this guy's like 55% likely to be better than the other, or something along those lines. I'm pulling that probability out of my butt right there.
Mhm.
But it is a concern, and it's why I'm probably one of the few, I guess, stat guys that still uses OPS frequently, simply because in most cases the simple OPS number is easy to interpret and people can understand. In most most applications, it's going to be useful. OPS doesn't have to be a perfect number to show how an 850 guy is a better hitter than a 750 guy. I'm a believer, which is weird considering what I do for a living. I believe in using the simplest tool possible for the job.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense too. I talked to one of my friends about this and he gave me a really similar answer. And I was like, oh, if I ever get the chance to speak to anyone who works at Fangraphs on the data side, then I'm going to ask them that. So I'm glad you were able to kind of back up what he had to say as well.
Yeah, one thing I'm not useful at many things in life, but I'm usually good with answering, war specific questions since I am one of the people, I guess, that defines war in a way, which
Mhm.
which makes me feel like I have like it's an extremely niche ultimate power.
It's
It's
one that we all appreciate here, and especially with me, it's something, yeah, like you guys are basically like my heroes. I've been reading you guys for years. I've loved your guys' content, so thank
I
you.
I guess it would be like being a member of the X-Men, but your
Yeah.
power is like being able to make grape jelly or something.
I harken back to the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, and then they had the game Weird Superheroes, and I guess you would kind of fall into the category. So like if Colin Mockery was like, here's War Interpreter Boy, that's Dan Szymborski.
Yeah, I loved the old British version of it. I didn't know the Wayne Brady one as well,
Yeah,
but I
the
used to
Drew
come
Carey
home from
adaptation that they did in the '90s. That's the one I haven't so much watched the newer ones, but the ones back in the '90s, those are the ones that I'll still look back on YouTube and just get a good kick out of. So
yeah, that was a fun show.
for sure,
I am not a comedian, but I did enjoy that show.
I just play one on TV, right?
God, that was so long ago. Sorry, I'm looking up what the air dates for the original UK one were, and yeah, it was 1988 to 1999. So yeah, I'm not hallucinating when I said I'd watch it when I like come home from school because I was in high school until 1996 and in college until 2000, because I am an aging Gen Xer,
Yeah, wonderful. I was born in
bordering
90,
senility.
I was born in '95. Not to make you feel old or anything, but that's yeah. So anyway,
So I could be your dad, you know.
that's strange way to put it, but okay. So the Cardinals, let's circle back a little bit to the Cardinals. For 2025 are projected to open the season currently with a $147 million payroll. That's according to Fangraphs on their payroll tab, which is down from $183 million that they finished with in 2024. Other potential trades, such as Arenado and what have you, notwithstanding, the team has stated that it intends to allow for opportunities for young players, but it also believes it can compete as well. So I guess my question to you, Dan, is based off of historical context, do you believe that winning and development can both exist in the same realm, or is that more of a fallacy and realistically teams can only really hope to accomplish one thing or the other in a given season?
I think you can do both, but there is a smaller range of error when you're trying to do both at the same time. And it's hard to do both if you're not currently doing both. It's hard to just say, let's start doing both of them if neither of them are going well. You need to be doing really well at one of them, I think, to kind of be also doing the other. I don't know. I think it's a little like juggling. Like you don't just throw all the balls up at the same time. I think. I don't know. I don't know much about juggling. I could be lying about that.
Well, you're a man of many talents, such as being able to decipher or define what war is. So, you got that going for you.
But that's more power than talent.
Fair enough. So that's your short answer is you have to at least do one really well in order for the other to occur.
Yeah, that's about what I would say, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, given the fact, well, I don't want to say that money is no longer a competitive advantage in baseball because you just saw the two best teams in baseball this season, the Yankees and the Dodgers, just spend like a gazillion dollars on their payroll and they made it. I mean, it's no strange. It's possible to win with a Moneyball, quote unquote Moneyball lineup. It's just that there's an added luxury of having to be able to spend, whatever money on a fourth outfielder. So the Dodgers can spend like what is was it like $80 million or whatever the amount was on a fourth guy like AJ Pollock. The Cardinals have to settle for guys like Michael Ciani. But at the end of the day, they're both probably going to give you a similar amount of WAR, right? I mean, I guess AJ Pollock back in the day, right? So when he was with the Dodgers and not the last season that he was pretty good at. But point being with player development, if you're a team that can continue to churn out top tier talents, regardless of those players being cycled into the major leagues and then your farm system potentially tanking, it is possible to do the former, right? Like we've seen Tampa Bay consistently have a top tier farm system and still have success in the major leagues. We see the Mets right now who are rebuilding and still have a really, really good farm system, probably a top five, top 10 in Major League Baseball. We see the Dodgers do that. The Astros, to a degree, were doing that a while back. So it's possible to fit in any realm there. It's obviously very difficult because naturally those players cycle in. It's also possible to see teams just do really well and then the farm system kind of depletes naturally, like I mentioned. But it's also possible to be in a scenario like the Miami Marlins, right? My beloved Miami Marlins, who are at the bottom of the league and also don't have a very good farm system because the player development is not very good in conjunction with the major league talent. So for the Cardinals' sake, you're right now kind of not Marlins bad in that scenario, but you don't have a very competitive team, nor do you have a very good farm system currently. So it behooves them at this point to kind of shred any value they have at the major league level. You've seen right now, Nolan Arenado is on his way out of St. Louis. Paul Goldschmidt they're not bringing him back. It would probably make sense. We're going to talk later about Eric Fetty. We're going to talk about Steven Matz. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ryan Helsley out the door pretty soon. Sonny Gray might be on his way out before July. So that kind of thing, et cetera, that kind of idea would make sense for the Cardinals right now because the depleted farm system, the player development team is seeing a lot of turnover in the front office and the analytics team. And that's all going to take place that's all going to come into fruition over the next few years. But, Rome wasn't built in a day and it's going to take some time to get back to that Cardinal way with just in a more adapted sense where you're relying more on analytics instead of just, the devil magic and maybe old models that Mozeliak and his team may have been employing.
Dan, is there one player based off of your projections? I haven't seen whether or not you guys have put the Zips projections out for the Cardinals yet or not. Is there one player you're intrigued by to take a step forward in 2025 based on your projections?
Well, from the offensive standpoint, there's not really. Win would have been the projection last year that stood out. Zips does have him as almost a 3-win player in 2025. Problem is that Zips actually still thinks Nolan Arenado is the best or the most valuable projected player on the team, just under 3 WAR. Also, there's actually no individual projected to 3 WAR in Zips this year. It's got a pretty high floor, but a pretty low ceiling generally. Zips kind of does have a fascination with Michael McGreevy this year. I'm not quite sure why, but he does have a pretty solid league average projection, as does Quinn Matthews already, Tink Hence, which I keep forgetting to change his name in the database to Tink Hens because I always see Markevian Hens. So I'm like, who the hell is that?
Yeah.
Before I remember, oh yeah, Tink Hens.
I feel like half of our fan base probably doesn't even know that his real first name is actually Markevian.
Yeah, it's weird how first names are. One of the things that angers me the most is on Fangraphs we have an automatic player linker that when you write a player's name. And you hit the player linker, it will automatically find the URLs for the players mentioned. But they have to match the name of the database. And we use MLB's current database of names as the names we use. And some of the names they choose are odd. Like you remember a long time ago, I mean, not personally, the old Red Sox and Indians outfielder Tris Speaker, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I
Well,
know what you're talking
he's
about.
not Tris Speaker in MLB's database anymore. He's Tristram Speaker,
Hmm.
which is weird because I have never heard him called that at any time in my life.
No.
So in my articles, I have to write Tristram Speaker. Uh,
Interesting.
That
just,
it
just,
links
it's
it.
just, it's just weird how names work. And sometimes you have players like these. For a long time, Doug DeCences was Douglas DeCences in the MLB. It's like nobody ever calls him that. And I've actually bothered MLB about it, but I think they're just ignoring me now.
It's
Because
like if
I know who to bother, but I don't think anyone wants to listen to me, which is probably a good strategy in life.
it's like if somebody said, "Hey, I can't believe Larry Jones made it to the Hall of Fame." You're like, "Who the hell is that?" "Oh, Chipper
Yeah.
Jones." Yeah.
It's like no, it's Chipper. Just change the name.
Yeah.
So Tink Hens and Markevian Hens are like that. It's going to be 20 years from now. I'm still going to think they're two different people, even though I probably will have in the interim had this conversation about 50 times. like Sean Mania. See, I always take everything off topic, so don't
No,
worry
you're
too
good. That's
bad.
why I left it open because I know you do.
I have never gotten. I've emailed his agent about this. We talked about other things over the years, but he never answers this question. When he was drafted, if you look back, like half the scouting sites and like college sites called him Seth Mania.
Hmm.
And at some point, he just became Sean Mania entirely, and Seth was never mentioned again. And I cannot find Seth anywhere in his name. And I do not know why he's called Seth Mania in so many references in like 2015, 2016. Names are funny that way. My name's hard to spell, but I'm literally always going to be Dan. You're not going to find an article that talks about what Larry Szymborski said.
Yeah.
Dan, are you sure it wasn't a Mandela effect with his name being Seth?
I don't know, but you can actually look it up and you can see that I'm not lying. Anyone listening to this, look up Seth Mania. It's a thing. It used to be.
I'm intrigued. I'm actually gonna, when we're done here, I'm gonna look at some old prospect reports for the A's, or maybe was it? Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Oakland
it was
when
with
he
Oakland. Yeah.
drafted. Yeah, I'm gonna look at some old reports and see because that's actually pretty intriguing. I wonder if it's a similar thing like Giancarlo and Michael Stanton back in the day, where he just decided to call
Ooh,
himself Giancarlo.
interesting.
But this
Hey,
one might have
I
a deeper meaning.
appreciated that because again, our Fangraphs player linker, when you have a Mike or a Michael, when you have a Mike Stanton, you will get
the
it will
reliever.
pop up. Yeah, it'll
Yeah.
pop up and it'll ask you, do you mean the reliever from the 80s to 90s to 2000s or the other Mike Stanton who was a reliever in the 80s for the Indians and Mariners? So I prefer just everyone to have a unique name. I think it should be like with the Screen Actors Guild. Everyone should have a unique name.
Well, I'm sure
Yeah,
you'll
I
have no
realize.
problem with Josh Nixon. What's his name? The password in Boston. Josh Nixon.
Johnston Garcia. I
Yeah,
think?
Garcia. That's it. I'm sure you won't have any issues with him.
Hey, you'd be surprised. I mean, there are two Jeff D'Amicos out there.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, they're two Max Muncies who aren't related,
That's right.
Yeah.
That is true.
which is so weird.
And you have the Brady Feigls who look exactly the same as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's another Dan Szymborski out there. There is a mechanic in Michigan. I mean, I'm probably related to distantly somehow because there are not that many Szymborskis. But I kind of think that at some point I have to kind of duel him Highlander style
For the right to the Dan Szymborski name.
to be the one true Dan Szymborski.
From now on, the loser shall be known as Daniel.
Hey, I have always worried that he's going to like get in trouble for something, and then it'll be on my name forever. Like Dan Szymborski of something Michigan murders 15 people. Like, oh god,
The evil
It's-
version of Dan Szymborski.
yeah, it's gonna be like that poor. There's a guy in media for not the Orioles, but in Baltimore named Jerry Sandusky with the
Oh
G.
no. That
And he
is-
gets a lot of hate
Oh,
from
no.
people, and he has to say, "Yeah, I'm a different person. My name has a G, not a J."
Oh, that's brutal.
There's a Washington writer named Mark Zuckerman who gets a lot of angry messages from people who think he's Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, that'd be funny.
Names are interesting. We have We have too many people for names to be useful. Maybe we all need like like when you have a Blizzard ID, when you have a number after your name.
Yeah, we just all in a dystopian future, we all go by government ID numbers instead of actual names.
For ease, we're going to have our government roundup numbers.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
So our next question comes to you from one of our writers. His name is George. He asked, "What is your favorite projection system besides your own?"
Probably Steamer, because Steamer now has a long record. It's available. Sometimes, if something is really weird, I will check Steamer to make sure that it's not something odd that happened on my end. I haven't found anything that way, but Jared does good work, and he's always there, I guess, to keep Zips honest.
Are the Cardinals doomed to a Rays Guardians model where they develop good young talent but are constantly cycling through players once they start earning more significant dollars? Or do you think the Cardinals are unique and maybe more of a hybrid and can draft and develop, but they also have the financial capability to afford to keep players around long term?
I do think that they have more of an ability to afford some of the players and to keep them than when you talk some of the teams like the Guardians. Uh, the Cardinals have always kind of hit above their weight revenue wise, simply because for the market size, it's a very well supported team. But I do think that they're not going to be in a position to be, extremely aggressive. uh, they'll pick their spots. I think like over the last, I forget the exact comparison, but from 2000, it was like 2010 to 2020, the Royals spent more on signing free agents not in their system than the Cardinals did, which is one of those weird statistics. The Cardinals signed their own players more, but they're always going to be, I think, a tinge of conservatism behind the things that St. Louis does.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I see this constant criticism that's come up, especially this offseason, since the Cardinals had announced that Chaim Bloom will be taking over after this season. And now that Bill DeWitt has okayed the transition plan, and the Cardinals inferring that they need to reduce the payroll because of extenuating circumstances, because of the TV issues, on top of an expected decline in ticket sales because of the direction that they're going in investing more in development than putting an emphasis on signing high priced free agents that will generate excitement around the team. And so I think that a lot of fans have some consternation about the idea that the Cardinals are just simply going to become one of those, like the Rays and the Guardians, kind of feeder teams to the good teams that can actually afford to pay for their talent. So that's kind of where that question was born, is like, do you think the Cardinals can kind of pseudo hybrid do both, where they do draft and develop the young talent that everyone wants, but to the same extent, they don't have to ditch them, 1 or 2 years before free agency because they're just going to become too expensive for them to be able to afford?
I don't think that's necessarily the risk. I mean, I think that's kind of a worst case scenario. I think that they'll still spend decently, but when the team is good enough to spend decently. And the truth is, when I look at the team right now, yeah, they're in the NL Central, so you're always going to have a chance when the NL Central, but it's not a great team right now. Hopefully, no one will be super mad about that. I don't think it's super
Controversial,
scandalous to say at
yeah.
this point. It might have been a few years ago, but they've kind of come off that long period where they were practically guaranteed to win like between 87 and 92 games. Once you knock like 5 games off of that, all of a sudden it gets harder to spend. I mean, the difference between spending $180 million on an 87 or 88 win team than spending that money on like an 81 or 82 win team.
Right.
Then even with the extra wild card, even being in the NL Central, your paths are narrowed and it feels like a worse investment. And the thing about the division is there's no one in the division that really puts a lot of fiscal pressure on you to keep up. The Cubs are always a team that has that potential, but they don't really do that. I mean, they're going to probably have they're going to have a higher payroll this year, but there's no chance that the Cubs are going to be a $300 million team anytime soon. They're not going to be the Mets, and they're not going to be the Dodgers. So the pressure to spend a ton is significantly reduced.
I remember I had asked you, maybe it was you that had written this um model, or maybe it was somebody else on the website, but I had asked you about your predicted bat speed model that I know like they just released bat speed information, Tango and his guys earlier. I think it was maybe last year or this season. I know it was available on research tool for last year as well, but I think it was publicly made available this year. Um, I was wondering if like the inputs that you guys used for the predicted bat speed model, were they able to be used for minor league data? Because I wanted to try to mess with around with that data and see if I can kind of come up with my own thing. I'm not sure if that's something, a question you can answer or.
I haven't really played a ton with it, making explicit minor league data, for the simple reason that the data so far that I've looked at doesn't really change the major league projections very much, simply because the manner I did things was probably capturing a lot of it, just not directly. So without anything to confirm minor league bat speed long term, I haven't really dug into that super deep. So that's not the most satisfying answer, but generally speaking, I'm conservative about implementing StatCast things simply because I like to make sure that I'm testing things off model. There's only so many things you can test internally in a system, a model. You really want to have those years of data coming in.
Right. No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Um, I didn't. I probably could have
No,
asked a couple more questions,
you're
but
good.
anything else that you wanted to go with, Dan or Jake?
Um, Dan Arenado said no to the Astros, and they pivoted to Walker at 3 years and $60 million, like you talked about when we were talking about Paul Goldschmidt. Do you like that fit for Christian Walker not Arizona, but in Houston? And do you think that Houston will benefit more from Christian Walker than they would have from Nolan Arenado?
I think this how it worked out is better for the Astros. I like Arenado, but I don't think he has really a ton of leverage at this point. Uh, his glove will always keep him, I think, as a legitimate player. But when you're talking as his projections have slid from like a 4-win guy to a 3-win guy, and it's just going to go down from there because that's how time works. It always wins. Once the Astros got Isaac Paredes from the Cubs, the justification for Arenado becomes a lot harder to just have because on a fundamental level, I mean, he was talking about being willing to pay first base, but I don't know why you'd want Arenado to play first base.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, that's like, you know, buying caviar to use to clean the windows of your car. It's like, yeah, it's like the whole reason you acquire Arenado is because you think he can play third. And if you're going to use Paredes as a first baseman, it's also okay. Like, why? I mean, he's not like a tremendous fielder at third base, but he's uh, uh passable. He's average-ish at third base and a good hitter. So why would you want him to be the first baseman? But the Astros have done weird things with first base. They turned it over to Abreu, and then after Abreu kind of bombed, they seem to be oddly satisfied with John Singleton for some reason, which I still can't figure out because I mean, it was fun to see him make a comeback after being 8 years out of the majors,
Right.
but he's not really that good a hitter, which is a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, especially for a first base position that its importance weighs heavily on offensive production.
And I imagine that the offers for Arenado aren't really that huge. I guess it depends on who's offering to pick up more salary than others.
I believe that was probably part of the case, was they were just simply the first one who kind of signaled, hey, we can't afford to keep Bregman, so we're going to pivot. Like, they were the first ones to kind of signal we're moving on to plan B, and he was probably atop of that. And so I think that's probably why. So that kind of will lead into my next question. Assuming that Bregman goes to one of Boston or New York, which one do you see as maybe a more likely scenario for Arenado, and which one do you think is the best fit for him based on of those two teams?
I think the Red Sox are possibly more likely because they do seem to be more aggressive this year than the Yankees are. I could see a situation where Yoshida finds himself on another team. Arenado ends up at third base for the Red Sox. Devers is the DH then in that scenario, which is probably an improvement. He's not a great third baseman, obviously. I mean, he's not awful there, but he's not exactly a plus at the position.
Right.
But I think if the Yankees are balking about salary, I don't think they're going to really. I don't know. I just don't see him matching up with Arenado there.
Do you think the monster would help, or would that? Do you think that would change his projection some if half of his games were in Boston as opposed to in St. Louis, that traditionally has suppressed his offensive profile?
It would actually improve it a bit. More from a batting average standpoint. I think what people sometimes miss about Fenway Park is for 40 years it was a huge home run park for right-handed batters, and it hasn't really been since the 80s. They did make some stadium changes, and since then it hasn't really been a home run park ever. Right now, Fenway is a batting average park, and Arenado, I mean, obviously he's not the kind of hitter he's not Luis a rise or anything. But he has had some pretty solid batting averages in the past. You look at what he was able to do in Colorado. So I think it could help him. I don't think it's going to be a significant edge.
Okay. And then there are three pitchers who are of particular interest for most Cardinal fans to see potentially moved this offseason. One being Eric Fetty, and we'll get to the other two in just a minute. But what are your thoughts on Eric Fetty and any type of potential surplus value he may hold and what that could potentially get the Cardinals in return?
I think you can get a real prospect for Fetty. He's due, I think, $7.5 million in 2025.
That's correct.
I don't have that in front of me.
That's correct.
But
yeah.
You're getting like for $7.5 million on a 1-year deal. That doesn't even get you Patrick Sandoval, who was injured. He signed, I think, for 218, if I'm thinking right. I mean, 7.5 is what you give a guy like in a pillow contract right now.
Right.
Not what you give an actual pitcher who can get guys out. Now, I kind of would prefer the Cardinals to play Eric Fetty, rather than get a prospect. But if they trade him, I think they can get a real prospect in return. Better than like just, a random reliever or something.
Right. And then the next guy the Cardinals fans have some interest in moving on from is a Steven Matz. And we saw earlier in the offseason that Matthew Boyd, who I think is kind of a comparable to Steven Matz, get 2 years and $29 million from the Cubs, while Steven Matz is only 1 year and $11 million owed to him. Do you think that would be not only an easy contract to move, but a potential slight value to teams that maybe the Cardinals could get, maybe a lottery ticket in return for that?
I think the thing about Boyd is that he came back after really a couple lost years from injury, and he pitched really well in his 8 starts. Obviously, it's only 8 starts, but he was striking out guys. I mean, he was never really a velocity guy, so that his velocity is not great isn't a thing. I think Steven Matz might have had more value if he had been injured the last 2 years because then there's some uncertainty. I think a lot of teams are going to look at him as just a guy who hasn't been completely healthy, hasn't really been that good especially last year. I think he has less value generally than Boyd does. So I'm not sure there's a ton of surplus value there. You might get someone in return because, again, it's a 1-year deal,
right?
And it's hard to be too terrible in a 1-year deal. But I'm not sure that he has anywhere near like the value Fetty has, or Boyd has, let alone Fetty.
Right, and then we'll close out this little part with the closer himself, Ryan Helsley. There's been plenty of speculation about the Cardinals should, entertain offers for him, and I'm certain that the Cardinals are at least in listening mode on what comes across their desk. But to this point, nothing has really come of significance. Your stance on should the Cardinals look to be actively be looking to move Ryan Helsley, or do you think that at least holding him until the deadline um, is the smarter play, knowing that there is, a tremendous amount of risk that comes with, relievers with high octane stuff and the injuries and with things of that nature. Is it worth the while to hold and risk it to the deadline at the very least?
I think if you're going to trade him, I think if the offers are there, I would trade him now, because most teams that are going to trade for a top closer have an idea they're going to be competitive, and they get more value from having him for the whole season. And I tend to think that relievers are the players you first want to move. Uh, I think that on a fundamental level, employing a closer or a reliever, obviously he's not super expensive, but that's kind of an inefficient use of your resources until you're a really, really good team, simply because you're paying a lot more per win for a reliever than any other position. So you want to make sure that you are that 87, 88, 89 win team. I don't think the Cardinals are. If the projections are right, they're kind of, again, a 500-ish team, maybe a couple wins above that, depending on how some of the playing time sorts itself out. But given that they want to trade Arenado, it's harder to see the case for Ryan Helsley, because let's say the Cardinals do trade, Fetty and Arenado and don't do much to replace them, and they're like a 77 win team for 2025. I mean, what value at that point does a closer who's going to walk in a year have for the team? And I'd be really hard pressed to say that that player has a ton of value to the team, and he's probably more valuable than what the Cardinals can get for him.
And Dan, I guess I kind of had another aside question, just more about your guys' website and your projection model. So I was looking at your Cy Young predictor a while back, and I know you guys have your own you guys have your own model for predicting like the Cy Young points, and you have the Phipps Cy Young Award. And it does a pretty decent job of predicting who's going to be the take-home winner of the Cy Young every year. So I'm kind of curious to see. I guess I kind of know the answer, just kind of like eyeballing stats and seeing where I went wrong in the past. But I was kind of hoping you could allude and kind of tell me, at like obviously without giving out any proprietary information, what is the what I guess what metric has the heaviest weight when you guys kind of conduct that regression and kind of see who is going to be the Cy Young and who gets the most Cy Young points in that model?
Well, the one that Zips uses when I do articles is different than the one that Tango uses. It's generally along the same lines. Uh, so I mean, it's not going to differ greatly. But as we've seen in recent years, win-loss record has become less important in the projections, because I think I mean, the electorate among writers has changed considerably in the last decade.
Mhm.
And it's only been 15 years since internet writers were even allowed in the Baseball Writers Association. And you started seeing fairly quickly uh, some of the uh, some of the voting change for the year end awards, because unlike the Hall of Fame, you don't have to have 10 years to vote in a year end award. I voted for Rookie of the Year my first year in the Baseball Writers Association, and I don't get my Hall of Fame vote until after next season. So the year end awards, they change quicker, and you've seen wins kind of disappear as a moving statistic. It might break ties when you have some of the writers still kind of cling to those. But I think we're not really at the point where everyone's using WAR, but using ERA, maybe FIP is a lot better than using win loss record. So I think the year end voting has actually gotten better, although that's going to change our models over time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I asked this question because I used to write for the Marlins site a few years back, and I got in trouble because I was going to I was kind of like talking from the sense that maybe Sandy Alcantara shouldn't be he should be the Cy Young Award winner, but I was shocked that he ran away with it the way that he did, just simply because you saw other guys from the National League like have higher pitching wars, and that's why I learned don't use WAR for award models or don't use or for awards as heavily as I thought as I was doing, right?
Yeah, yeah, you
So
did
then,
have ERA though. He had like
yeah,
two
the
20
ERA
something.
was the one that did it. Yeah, and I know by Baseball Reference War it was like a clean sweep, but I was just like, oh, like, but what about guys like freaking, who was it? I think it was Zach Wheeler, who was really, or maybe, not Zach Wheeler. It was Aaron Nola, Carlos Rodon, who had slightly better seasons by F4. But that's when I really learned to not really take a half a win with too much salt, right? And then compared to how many runs he's actually allowing and how many innings he pitched and how many complete games he's had in an era where they don't really do that anymore. Pitchers don't pitch as deep in the games as they used to anymore. So I learned my lesson the hard way there. I got absolutely grilled, but it made a lot of sense. And I also wanted to ask you kind of that's where it stemmed from.
I mean, 25 years ago, Kyle Wright would have won that Cy Young Award.
Oh yeah.
So using ERA is an improvement. Even if he didn't have the highest WAR, I mean, in Fangraphs WAR, he was up there. He was behind Nola and Rodon, I believe. Was he behind Fried that year? I don't remember.
He was about a win ahead of Fried, but
okay.
He was behind Nola and Rodon.
Okay, yeah. As I age, Dan at 47 or 46 does not have the same memory as Dan at 26 did, which is a constant source of frustration.
No, if you want makes you feel any better, I didn't know either. I've just had the website pulled up right now, the leaderboard from a couple of years back.
Dan, thank you so much for breaking the glass and jumping through here like Stone Cold Steve Austin. You came down the ramp with the steel chair in hand and absolutely killed it. Thank you so much for joining us and taking some time out of your busy holiday schedule to join us, and we really appreciate it and hope we can talk to you again in the near future, hopefully before opening day.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I'll be happy to come on anytime.
All right, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
And Adam, thanks for coming on and showing up for the pod as always. We'll talk to you again next week whenever we do our Writer Roundtable.
Of course, man. Look forward to it.
Absolutely. And from all of us at Viva Albertos, for Dan Szymborski, we want to wish you all a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and thank you guys so much for listening and joining us on a weekly basis, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Viva Albertos podcast. Make sure you go over to X and follow us at Viva Albertos. Also, if you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button and also hit that bell so you can be notified the moment that our episodes are released to the public. So make sure you go and do that, and have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.